So thank you, Brian and Matthias and everybody who came up here, and Ivana. It's not easy to do it, but thank you. We appreciate it. And it is so sweet to trust in Jesus. It's a beautiful promise. Well, morning, church family.
Morning.
It's good to be back with y'all. We are doing a sermon series on what? Prayer. It's an interesting concept. It is something that is quite prevalent in the scriptures, in the gospel, in the Christian life. It's something that's often overlooked. And it's something that I think we can learn a lot about. I think it's one of those things that you never quite ever really get a handle on. You ever have that, like math? You realize that today, at this exact moment, there are people out there who are inventing new mathematical principles. And they're finding new things about the universe. Some of you maybe engineers, Matthias, you can back me up on this maybe. You'll know about string theory and the idea that there are essentially endless possibilities mathematically of how the world can put itself together and the way that it works. And I think prayer is a little bit like that. I don't think you can ever get a fully grasp the importance of what prayer is. But I think we can continue to learn. No matter where you are on your Christian walk, no matter where you are in your relationship and your journey with Jesus right now, I think we can all grow a little bit more in our understanding of prayer today. At least that is my hope. And the hope of what my message is today. But before we do that, let's go ahead and break for prayer one more time, just for my sake. Father, I'm just so grateful that you are here. I'm going to ask right now that you would be with me. You'd be with the message that I have. It's your message that you gave to me, I believe, and so let my words not be mine, but yours. And as we continue to dive into your word, the scriptures, let us get a better understanding of who you are and a clear picture of your face. In your name, amen. So, as we go through our sermon series, we finished up the first of the 6 major questions that you have to ask when doing investigative journalism or journalism, right? Who, what, where, when, why, and how. We finished who. We know who we are praying to. We've talked about that. We had some interesting journeys into the idea of who God is, his identity. And now we are on what? Very good. All right. Almost there. I promise I will get you out pretty soon so we can eat. All right. We're going to be talking about what? What is prayer? And of course, sermon last week with Pastor Dwight was all about prayer. The idea and what is an interesting idea? Who kind of gives you the identity, but what gives you the characteristics? Who tells you the subject, but what opens it up a little bit? And that's what we're going to be looking at. It talks about the nature of the object. And of course, since it seemed to work last week, I'm going to try to do as many gratuitous pumpkin pie references as possible. Those of you who were not here last week, it's an inside joke. All our sermons are online. You'll get it later. I think before we get started in kind of looking at that, though, we have to talk about kind of what's become the backbone, really, of this series, especially for Dwight and myself. It's this wonderful quote from Ellen White. You can find it in Steps to Christ, page 93. It says, "Prayer is the opening of the heart to God as to a friend. Not that it is necessary in order to make known to God what we are, but in order to enable us to receive him. Prayer does not bring God down to us, but brings us up to him." Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful quote. Much wisdom in that we go up to God. He does not come down to us. We're going to be talking about an interesting aspect of prayer today. Appreciated Pastor Dwight's sermon. I think it led in really well to what God's leading us into today. And there's several different characteristics of what prayer is. Again, I talk about this. We try to nail it down and put it into a box. The Western mind, if you understand how the Western mind works, we learned it from the Romans, who learned it from the Greeks. And the Greeks, the philosophers especially, came up with the idea of classification. Right? The idea that this is in a box and it is separate from that which is in another box. It's a way of differentiating one thing from another. And it's how we get, especially talking about animals and plants and the genus and the family and understanding that either something is one thing or it is another, but it cannot be both. It is in these separate classifications. But the reality in life is much more entangled. It's a lot less simple. It's more complicated than that because, in fact, you can be two things. I can be both angry and sad at the same time. I can be both happy and angry at the same time. I have two little foster brothers, and let me tell you right now, I love them very dearly, and there were times where I regret every decision that ever led us to taking them. Stare at them and just be like, I love you so much, but parents, you understand what I'm talking about. You can feel two things at the same time. You can be two places at the same time, right? Everybody ever seen that? You're on the state line, stand on one side, stand on the other, right? There are several things that make things a little bit more complicated, and in the Eastern mind, this makes sense. One thing can be several different things. And this is why the biblical languages can be so hard, because you have Greek, which is so classified, and everything is in its precise place and order, so that you can't just say love, you have to say what kind of love, because there's 7 different types. You can't just say, oh, I like this thing. You have to say, I enjoy, or there's a particular specificity to it. Versus in the Hebrew language, one word can mean several different things. And in fact, it does. Talking about just the word water, mayim, it means a great many. Something big, something that is so big it cannot be counted. That's the idea. And so prayer, we're going to define one aspect of what prayer is, but understand this is not the only aspect of what prayer is. But I believe, after studying and looking and talking with Pastor Dwight and reading the commentaries and various things, I really believe that this is the heart of what prayer is. Everything else branches out from this basic idea, and that is prayer is an act of intimacy. Now, what is intimacy? It's a word that we use a lot, often, but we often don't really know what that is. So I looked it up in the dictionary, Merriam-Webster, and said intimacy is the state of being intimate. Very helpful. Very helpful. Thank you, Internet. And so I looked up, I said, okay, very good. Let me look up what it means to be intimate. To be intimate means to make something known, publicly or formally, and to communicate delicately or indirectly. If I could paraphrase a little bit, intimacy is to know someone so well that you can read in between the lines. You know what I'm talking about? You ever have that friend that you don't even need to say anything, you just look at each other and you both start cracking up because you know exactly what's going on? I remember one time we used to describe, we used to have in college, my roommate and I had this description of, the old, cranky old man is, those kids and their hip-hop jazz music. And one day we were in Vespers together at Southern Adventist University, beautiful Vespers, and the president of the Southern Union, newly elected, wonderful man, a neat man, a very cool man, came up to speak, and in his deep, resonant bass voice came up and was speaking to us about young people, because I am looking at a bunch of young people. We need to be careful about the things we do and the movies we watch and the hip-hop jazz music we listen to. And without even looking at each other, both of us put our heads down, backed up, and slowly walked out and laughed harder than I think I've ever laughed in my life. Because we always joke. We say, when someone talks about, young people, hip-hop, jazz music. And no one knew else Nobody else got that. No one else knew what was going on, but the two of us, without even talking to each other, walked outside in different areas, by the way, of the church, found each other in the lobby, and started busting up laughing to the point that someone came outside and was like, "Are you guys okay?" Because we just knew. That's the friendship, that's the intimacy that we're talking about. This is the idea that you know somebody so well, you can look at them and 2.5 gigabytes of information just immediately passes across, and you know. My parents have that relationship. Oftentimes it's my mom looking at my dad. My dad will be saying something and all of a sudden he'll go, "Ha!" and quit. Have a look. You hear stories about pastors talking up in front and the Spirit is moving them. Interesting how the Spirit never moves people to end quicker. But the Spirit is moving them and the sermon is going long and the wife will stand in the back and all she has to do is stand in the back. And all of a sudden, "And the Lord spoke to," let us pray. To know someone so well, you can read in between the lines. You hear the subtext. You understand what they are saying. You understand what they are communicating beyond what is being said. Intimacy. We have a lot of intimate relationships in the Bible, but the one I think I want to look at today, the one that we've looked at before together, is in Exodus 33. Because to me, I think it sums up a lot. Now, of course, we can talk about Jesus and his relationship with the Father, but that's such a unique relationship. I want to talk about one that's a little bit closer to me, closer to home. Jesus in John 6 says, "No one has seen the Father, but somebody came pretty close." So we're going to talk about him right now. Exodus 33. Now, to give you the context of Exodus 33, this is directly after the incident with the golden calf. Moses comes down. Aaron messed up, made a calf. They're worshiping it. Moses throws down. Of course, if any of you have ever seen the classic Cecil B. DeMille film, The Ten Commandments, he throws it down onto the calf, and the calf splits, and there's a whole He doesn't do that in the Bible, but it's a beautiful, it's a great scene to see the wrath and this is bad. And that's the idea, that there's this problem, there's these issues that are going on. And so God starts out the chapter by saying, "Okay, you guys go ahead and go to the promised land. I'm not going to go with you. If I do, I'm going to kill you." It's in the Bible, read it. He goes, "If I go with you, I'm going to kill you because you're stubborn. You're not going to happen. So you guys go. I'm going to clear it out like I promised, but I'm not going with you." Mm-mm. And then Moses starts this great dialogue. Exodus 33, chapter 33, verse 7. Now Moses used to take the tent and pitch it outside the camp, a good distance from the camp, and he called it the tent of meeting. And everyone who sought the Lord would go out to the tent of meeting, which was outside the camp. And it came about, whenever Moses went out to the tent, that all the people would arise and stand, each at the entrance of his tent, and gaze after Moses until he entered the tent. Whenever Moses entered the tent, the pillar of cloud would descend and stand at the entrance of the tent, and the Lord would speak with Moses. When all the people saw the pillar of the cloud standing at the entrance of the tent, all the people would arise and worship, each at the entrance of his tent. Thus the Lord used to speak to Moses face to face, just as a man speaks to his friend. Remember that phrase. When Moses returned to the camp, his servant Joshua, the son of Nun, young man, would not depart from the tent. And Moses said to the Lord, "See, you say to me, bring up this people, but you yourself have not let me know whom you will send with me. Moreover, you have said, I have known you by name, and you have also found favor in my sight. Now therefore, I pray you, if I have found favor in your sight, let me know your ways, that I may know you, so that I may find favor in your sight. Consider too that this nation is your people." And he, talking about God, said, "My presence shall go with you and give you rest." Then Moses said to God, "If your presence does not go with us, do not lead us up from here. For how then can it be known that I have found favor in your sight, I and your people? Is it not by your going with us, so that I and your people may be distinguished from all the other people who are upon the face of the earth?" The Lord said to Moses, I will also do this thing of which you have spoken, for you have found favor in my sight, and I have known you by name. Then Moses said, I pray you, show me your glory. It's a beautiful dialogue between Moses and God. Someday, when we get to heaven, I want to see this on whatever technology they have. Big screen. IMAX. I want to see that back and forth. What that must have been like. Moses going back to God and saying, look, I know you. You've talked to me. You say that I found favor. If I have found favor, then don't leave us because we're not going anywhere without you. And God says, no. I'm going to, and he goes, no. Understand this. How are people supposed to know that we have a relationship with you if you're not with us? And God says, okay, you win. You go. And Moses says, show me your glory. I want to talk about that phrase really quickly. Show me your glory. The word glory there, and I know I've talked about this before, but it bears repeating. Glory, the actual Hebrew word there is kavod. Kavod. And it means, in the Old Testament, it's used 156 times to mean glory. The second most common time it's used is honor. It's used 32 times for that. But it also means abundance, riches, dignity, reputation. Moses isn't saying, now keep in mind, Moses just said, you said I know you by name, I know your character. But there is something more to you. I want to know you more. Show me who you are, because I know you're holding something back. And God has to say to him, I want to show you who I am. But if I do that, you're going to die. Tell you what, I will come and I will show you my back. I'll just kind of whiz on by, and you can look and see me from behind. A glimpse. Now, have you ever gotten lost anywhere in public before, in the mall? Maybe it's a little kid, that's one of your recurring nightmares. You just find yourself in a big place. Some of you know me. You know that one of my favorite stories to tell, especially if you go to school here at ACAT, is the story of Universal Studios. My family grew up 15 minutes from Universal City, and we used to go all the time. We had that buy one day, get a year free, so we would go, all the time. We'd just go and enjoy. That was our family day. We'd just go, Universal, go on the rides, enjoy time together. And when we first began to go, I get easily distracted, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, and I got lost. And I remember one time we went to a school function, so there were multiple kids that my parents and the sponsors had to look out for. I got lost 7 times. I tell that story as my dad came every time for me. By the 3rd time, he was like, look, just don't even bother, just, you know where the car is. At the end of the day, don't bother. But the truth is, I got lost a lot. And the problem was, I would look and see someone who from the back looked like my mom or my dad and think, there they are. I would go about my business. I would turn around, still see who I thought was them from the back. You ever done that before? You ever walked up to somebody who you think from the back is a person you care about and maybe just wrapped them up in a hug and they turn around? It's not them. I had a good friend of mine do that thinking it was his fiancée. Yeah. Kissed her. All on the mouth. Yep. It was not his fiancée. His response is one of the greatest ones. He goes, hi, I'm Nathan. Yeah, it happens. To see someone from the back, you don't know who they are. But the reality is you can still get a pretty good sense of who someone is from the back. A pretty good shape, pretty good understanding of who someone is. You can pick them out in a crowd, even if it is from the back. Moses read between the lines there. He saw that God was saying, I'm going to go with you. And Moses says, I want to know more. I want to know more. This is the intimacy that we're talking about. And I want to bring us up to this next phrase. Remember that phrase I said before? I believe it's in verse 12. It says, God spoke to Moses face to face as a man speaks to his friend. I want to talk about this because this word, friend, or reya, is a very important word. It's a word that actually comes from another word, ra'ah, but it means friend, companion, neighbor, etc., somebody that you know. But the root word that it comes from, interestingly enough, talks about a shepherd, specifically a shepherd feeding his sheep. Now, I am not an animal husbander, but I do know, having talked to a few people who have been shepherds, that you actually can know your sheep distinctly. They all have personalities and like dogs or cats. You actually can know who they are, and you can tell they're distinct. They're even to the point where you can tell the sounds that they make are distinct. And especially when you're feeding them. And feeding, especially from Psalm 23, is an act of intimacy because sheep will not eat when they are uncomfortable. If they are uncomfortable in any way, they will not eat. Sheep basically shouldn't be alive. They won't drink water unless it's from a still source, and they won't eat unless they feel completely safe. If I did that, I would never eat or drink in an airport ever again. It's an intimate act to feed sheep. And the idea here is that God and Moses knew each other the way that a shepherd knows his sheep, their tendencies, and that Moses felt safe with God. Now think about this. I know I've talked about this before. I know I've done this description before, but I love C.S. Lewis's description of Aslan in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Some of you know what I'm talking about. Aslan is a metaphor for God, specifically the Jesus character. And Aslan is described how? As a lion. And at the very end, Lucy asks Mr. Tumnus, is he safe? And Mr. Tumnus responds, no, he's not safe, but he's good. He's a wild lion, but he's good. It's not safe, but you're safe. That's the idea, the intimacy of being safe in a dangerous place. Have you ever felt scared before? You ever been in a place where you did not feel safe? And then something or someone shows up, something changes, and that thing or person entering the situation all of a sudden makes you feel at peace. That's God. That's the relationship that Moses had with God. I love another great Ellen White quote talking about this relationship, this moment where God comes to him and speaks to him. It's found in Gospel Workers, page 34. This experience, above all else, the assurance that God would hear his prayer and that the divine presence would attend him, was of more value to Moses as a leader than learning of Egypt or all his attainments in military science. No earthly power or skill or learning can supply the place of God's immediate presence. In the history of Moses, we may see what intimate communion with God it is man's privilege to enjoy. To the transgressor is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of a living God. He's not safe. But Moses was not afraid to be alone with the author of that law, which had been spoken with such awful grandeur from Mount Sinai, for his soul was in harmony with the will of his Maker. Why is this important? Why are we talking about this? Because intimacy in a relationship with God, intimacy in prayer is vital. I cannot stress to you enough how important that is. In fact, intimacy with God, intimacy specifically in prayer, is the defining characteristic between the heroes and the villains in the Bible. What was different between Saul and David? Did Saul disobey God? You know he did. Did David disobey God? Oh, you better believe it. Did it cause problems in their life? Did it cause division in their house? Did it cause strife among Israel? Yes. The difference was David was what? A man after God's own heart. So when problems came, when issues came up, David runs to God. I love Psalm 51. In fact, you know what? I wasn't going to do it. But let's just read some of the opening parts of Psalm 51. If you have your swords with you, if you have your Bibles, turn to Psalm 51. I just love it. I wrote an entire monologue changing this, interpreting it into modern language for teenagers. It's just a beautiful description. Be gracious to me, O God. Verse 1. According to your loving kindness, according to the greatness of your compassion, blot out my transgressions. Wash me thoroughly from my iniquity and cleanse me from my sins. For I know my transgressions and my sin is ever before me. Against you and you only I have sinned and done what is evil in your sight, so that you are justified when you speak and blameless when you judge. Behold, I was brought forth in iniquity, and in sin my mother conceived me. Behold, you desire truth in the innermost being, and in the hidden part you will make me know wisdom. Purify me with hyssop, I shall be clean. Wash me, and I shall be whiter than snow. Make me to hear joy and gladness. Let the bones which you have broken rejoice. Hide your face from my sins and blot out all my iniquities. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit within me. Do not cast me away from your presence, and do not take your Holy Spirit from me. Restore to me the joy of salvation, and sustain me with a willing spirit. Then I will teach transgressors your ways, and sinners will be converted to you. I love that description. Intimacy is so vital. Paul, before he ever began his journey, had 3 days being blind. You know what he did during those 3 days? He was communing with God. He was talking with God. He was becoming intimate with God. I have a friend who, for reasons of health and issues, went into blindness for a while. He became temporarily blind. I asked him about it, and he says it was the most vulnerable he has ever felt. He said, I couldn't see, I couldn't do anything. I had to rely on everyone or somebody else to do anything. I could not do anything to help myself. Luckily, he, through some changes in diet and issues, he was able to regain his sight. It was very temporary. It was only, I think it was like 72 hours. But I remember him talking, that was the most scared I've ever been. Can you imagine Paul being blind for 3 days, helpless? And that's when God comes to him and says, here, I'm going to teach you my gospel. Intimacy. Intimacy. It is the defining characteristic. Go through every major hero of the Bible, every story, and you will find them talking to God. You will find an intimacy between them and the Creator. In fact, don't just take it from me. I know I'm reading her a lot today, but there's a lot of wisdom. I was reading a lot of Ellen White in this, and she has some incredible words to say. Gospel Workers, page 36, just 2 down. Communion with God imparts to the soul an intimate knowledge of His will. Why was Moses not afraid to be alone with the author of life, of the author of the law? Because he was in harmony with the will. But many who profess the faith know not what true conversion is. Gut check time. They have no experience in communion with the Father through Jesus Christ, and have never felt the power of divine grace to sanctify the heart. Praying and sinning and praying. Their lives are full of malice, deceit, envy, jealousy, and self-love. The prayers of this class are an abomination to God. True prayer engages the energies of the soul and affects the life. He who thus pours out his wants before God feels the emptiness of everything else under heaven. All my desires before thee, said David, and my groaning is not hid from thee. My soul thirsteth for God, for the living God. When shall I come and appear before God? When I remember these things, I pour out my soul in me. Now that is some harsh language, family. And let me tell you, If you think I didn't feel convicted reading that, woo! It's not just that God isn't listening to the prayers. It isn't just that he doesn't like those prayers. He says, those things are an abomination to me. A prayer without intimacy is disgusting to God. Makes you stop and think, right? Now I lay me down to sleep. Dear Jesus, bless us food. A prayer without intimacy is disgusting. Now, this is me talking. This is me paraphrasing. But a prayer without intimacy is disgusting to God. True prayer should affect your life. Prayer should be transformational. True prayer doesn't leave you where you are at, but is in fact the way that God continues his relationship with you. Now, I often thought it was the study of his word, and to be honest, studying his word to me is also an act of prayer. We're going to study that in a couple weeks. But prayer is the way that God changes my character and yours. It's through prayer. Now, this is what's interesting. When we think of prayer, who do we usually think of is praying? Is that something God does? Something we do. God can only change our lives. The gospel can only become transformational in your life. You can only become the person God wants you to be through prayer. Now, this is great, Ellen White, but she always tells us, go to the scriptures. So where do we find this biblically? It took me a while. And I kept going back to the same place. So join me. I don't like hopping around like this, but I think it's important. Matthew 7. Matthew chapter 7. The very end of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus' most famous sermon, we're going down to verse 21. Jesus talking about the difference between false prophets and true prophets. People are going to come in, they're going to say, I'm a Christian, and the message is going to be not from God. How do you know this? By their fruits. Good fruits, bad fruits. Jesus goes on to qualify this by saying, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven will enter. I'm going to go back to that first quote again. Why was Moses not afraid to be in communion with God? Because he was in harmony with God's will. Why was he safe? Because he knew what God's will was. What is Jesus saying here? You get in by knowing the will. Not everyone who says, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father who is heaven will enter. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name? And in your name cast out demons, and in your name perform many miracles? And I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. What's the accusation here? Is it that they're liars? Not really. You could argue that. Is it that they're prideful? Is it that they are lustful? Is it there's some sort of deviance? What is the accusation that keeps them from the kingdom? Jesus doesn't know them. It's a lack of intimacy, folks. Something simple, isn't it? You'd think, going back to that argument, when you read the story of Naaman, why didn't he want to go into the Jordan River? It was embarrassing. It was a simple thing. And his soldiers go to him and go, if he had asked you to do a crazy thing, like jump off a building or go fight 1,000 men, you'd have done it. It's easy for us to want to do big things. But God says, if you don't know me, Paul repeats this in 1 Corinthians 13 when he says, you can do all this stuff, but if you don't have love, sorry. So I was studying this, it hit me. We're very good at doing church, especially in our denomination. We're very good at knowing things. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's safe to know things. The only safety we have is in the Word of God. But sometimes I wonder, do we know the author of the book or the book itself? Jesus told us, you search the scriptures because in them you think you find salvation, but it's not there. It's in the one who wrote them. Now I don't want to leave you on a negative note. And I don't want to focus too much on how, because we're going to explore that in depth later on. But I want to give you 3 simple things. 3 simple ways to begin to become intimate with God. The first one, Pastor Dwight talked about at length last week. So those of you who were here, you're going to understand this. And this is a hot word for millennials. Be real. Now, it's a very millennial word. Some of you know that. It's be real, man. It's not real. Now, when I was growing up, they said poser, right? Chris, you know what I'm talking about, right? That dude's a poser. That was the worst thing you could call someone. They're fake. They're posing as something, but they're not real. Poser. I don't know. I grew up in California. We're a little bit different there. Maybe it wasn't here the same. All right, but be real. Now, what does that mean? It means talk to God. Open up. It's such a simple thing. And as Pastor Dwight unpacked last week, it just means talk to him about everything. You can come to him with the good, the bad, and the ugly. But go to him. Don't just wait and be like, let me calm down. No, go to him. That's why I love Psalm 130. That's why I love a lot of the Psalms. That's why I love Lamentations. Lamentations is a book of, basically, God's abandoned us. Run, flee. But it's in the Bible because it's there. And he goes, you know what? Even as I write Lamentations 3, even as I think about these things, even as the gall comes up in my mouth and I want to spit because I feel so horrible, I think about what God has done, and his mercies are new every morning. This is why I love that. Be real with God. That's a hard thing. Anybody who grew up with John Ford Westerns knows. Real men don't cry. Duke didn't express his feelings. John Wayne didn't walk up and tell people about his emotions. No, he held it inside where it festers as a nice mental illness. Or some of you, maybe modern era, NCIS, never apologize. It's a sign of weakness, right? It's hard for us sometimes to open up. Especially as Christians. You know, it's funny, church should be the place where we feel the most open. And yet it's the place where if I were to walk down and ask you, how are you doing today? 90% of you would say what? I'm not going to do that, I promise. But how many of you would feel comfortable enough here with me? Check on me, by the way. To say, so good. Yeah, it's been kind of hard. You know what? I'm a little bit angry at God right now. But I'm here. But to be honest, I didn't really want to come here. It's a great book I'm studying, and it fit more with the 2 weeks from now, but it's called Sometimes I Don't Feel Like Praying. Felt that way? Be real with God, number 1. Number 2, talk about the little things. Talk about the little things. God cares about the little things in your life. When I was growing up in the little church that we had, about 25, 50 members, there was this, we call them snowbirds because they fly in for the winter and leave in the spring. But these people would come in, and there was this couple from Canada, a wonderful old man. He was from the West Indies. We have a couple West Indians out here, some Caribbean islanders. And he would come in and pray. And I hated when he prayed. Because the man went on and on And I timed it one time because I thought, I'm not crazy. 15 minutes from the front. Now, as some of you know, I have ADHD. I talked about that a little bit earlier. Major ADHD. And when I say I have it, have it. Now look in the cutesy like, oh, sometimes I can't focus. No. I have it like prisoner of war with my arms behind me in a hut somewhere have it, okay? I am stuck with it. I remember my parents finally had to go to a therapist because they're like, we need a professional in on this. And they gave us a brochure and they had 35 signs. And of those, I think I had 31. And it wasn't like, oh, sometimes like that. Yup, that's a Wednesday for me. Yup. I have it. Which means about 90 seconds into his 15-minute sermon or a 15-minute prayer, I was gone. I'm like, I'm gone. But reflecting back on that, I remember listening to him and thinking, man, it's beautiful. Because he would just talk about anything. He would go up there, and Lord, I remember yesterday I was walking down the street and I saw a dog and it had 3 legs. God, be with that 3-legged dog. And you're thinking, what is wrong with you, man? Come on! There's food waiting. But that's how he was with God. Now later on we're going to talk about where and when. And biblically I think that was inappropriate to be that long because different prayers are for different places. But I remember looking back thinking, that's awesome. Because that's how he just talks to God. Every day. Little things. Things he sees in the streets. Things he sees all around. He just talks to God about the little things. It's beautiful. Number 1, be real. Open up. Number 2, talk about the little things. And number 3, avoid ruts. Avoid getting into a routine where it's just normal, where you're just waking up and doing those things. Authenticity is key to intimacy. If you already know the answer to a question, or if you're already saying something, if you catch yourself maybe repeating a mantra of sorts, stop. Take a moment. Open up again. Maybe use some different language. Maybe use some different words. I had a friend that every third word, I kid you not, every third word was Lord in his prayer. And Lord, thank you, Lord, for the Lord, and the Lord, 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 the Lord, the Lord, the Lord. And I asked him, I said, dude, is this like a thing? And he goes, you know what, I don't even think about it anymore. It's just, I've always talked that way. I get nervous, I don't like praying. It just became routine for him. The word didn't mean anything. It was just a tick, a way to keep cadence. Avoid ruts. The story is told about a couple who were been dating for a while, and they'd gotten into a ditch. They just kind of, and so needing a break from each other, if they will, they said, let's see other people. Let's see if this freshens something up because it's just not working between us. And so being a modern man, the young man went on a dating site, put his profile, set it up, and he decided not to go for the sites that kind of explain everything that go up with the profile. He said, I just want to kind of throw it out there in the universe and find it. And he got a message back from somebody. Now back in those days, you didn't have the profile, you just had a screen name. So Princess Hearts 357 messaged him back and said, oh, I like similar things to you. You like to go outside, I enjoy that, I do all these different things. And he goes, wow, it seems to be nice. Nothing like my previous girlfriend. Really glad. So this is going to be nice, it's going to be different, it's going to be exciting for a change. She wants to go out. So he got himself ready, went out to the beach, and met at the restaurant right on the pier. And as he's sitting there waiting, who should show up? His ex-girlfriend. The whole time, they never talked to each other. The relationship was there, but there was no intimacy. Family, if you want to grow in your relationship with God, if you want to keep going, I beg you, start to become intimate. Because it's not just a neat thing. It's not just something to add to your everyday. From what I am studying, what I am learning right now, it's the difference for eternity. An intimate relationship. It's going to make a difference in your everyday life. Just be real. You can talk about the little things. If you can avoid those ruts, I guarantee you, God is going to do something amazing with your life.